goes there?
The Delapore Media Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Delapore Media Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Wall. This is a Lovecraftian NPR-style show where I bring you topics in literature that inspire my TTRPGs in writing so that you can be inspired in your own creative pursuits. I read cosmic horror works of today and yesterday, I talk about theory and history, I workshop ideas, and hopefully, we all learn something along the way that makes us better, more informed creators of horror. If you like what you hear, please leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, as that will help the show grow and reach more listeners. In this episode, we're going to continue to pull on the threads of Amanda Montell's book, Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism, and see where they can lead us when it comes to producing fictional cults in our cosmic horror storytelling. In episode 10, we looked at some cults from the Fourth Great Awakening in the post-war United States. Groups like the People's Temple, Heaven's Gate, Scientology, and Synanon. These organizations and others are covered in the first half of Cultish. The second half of the book ventures into territory that Lovecraft and his circle likely would have found it difficult to imagine. The ironic horror of tragedies like Jonestown and Heaven's Gate, and the harrowing stories of escapees from Synanon and Scientology, is that they made cults and cult-like behavior notorious, edgy, and popular. So let's talk about reimagining cosmic horror as cults reimagine themselves in the here and now, through strategies like pyramid schemes, health and fitness fanaticism, and influencer self-help gurus. A little caveat as we get started here. On the last episode, I talked about linguistic techniques cult leaders employed to obtain, break, and keep followers. These are the techniques explored in Cultish, The Language of Fanaticism. They include love bombing, establishing enemies, and creating thought-terminating cliches. And while I gave very human examples of all of these, I really didn't discuss how these techniques could conceal and pass on the taint of cosmic horror. I've been thinking about it, and now that episode 10 is released, I want to come back and give you some examples using the Cthulhu Mythos that demonstrate how cosmic horror might embed itself in all of these techniques. At the same time, these examples might act like a refresher as we are about to discuss more contemporary iterations of cults that are often better at concealing their cult-like qualities compared to their ancestors. So let's start with love bombing. Now remember, love bombing isn't just about praise and compliments. It's about making the victim feel as though they're understood, and perhaps understood in a special way for the first time. Imagine an impressionable artist receiving dreams from Cthulhu or some other Lovecraftian entity, and feeling like the ocean off a particular pier or an old cemetery where they live is calling to something unnatural inside of them. A cult leader with Mythos knowledge would almost certainly know these experiences and be able to say, I've been there. I've had those dreams. I've had those yearnings. There's nothing wrong with you. It's okay to be scared, but let me show you how special you are, because the old ones or the deep ones or the ghouls call to you like they call to me. Automatically, the Mythos cult leader is establishing a relationship and a connection with someone in this way. And because of that, because they are someone who has more experience in this particular setting, there is a power dynamic set up where the new initiate will lean on the cult leader for experience, because the new initiate might be terrified of the dreams or the uncomfortable yearnings, be they for the sea or for tombs below the earth or something in the sewers or anything along those lines, anywhere where the old ones or their servitors and the strange other species that occupy the earth might dwell. And because the cult leader might be the only connection that this new initiate has to this other world that frightens them, It means that the cult leader can press upon that power dynamic to get things from the initiate. Anything from buy me a coffee to go pick up my laundry to go kill that guy for me. It's all within the realm of possibility now because this power dynamic is established through love bombing. And as we talked about last time, love bombing immediately leads into establishing the dichotomy of insiders and outsiders for the cult. Once you are love bombed into the cult, you are told that there are enemies all around you. And if the Cthulhu Mythos is at the center of your cult, then this one becomes pretty easy. Because the new initiate is special, the cult leader has told them as much. And they're leaning on the cult leader to understand this new world that they've stepped into, that they put a toe in the water of for the first time. And it's easy enough for the cult leader to then say, we have enemies all around us because people are jealous of us, because we have connections to the alien gods and the strange other species that walk the earth that other people don't. And so, of course, other people find you frightening and confusing because they're just not on your level. They are not in a place where they comprehend the old ones the way that our cult does. And so while they are calling you insane or mad or crazy or dangerous, they're actually the ones who are crazy or dangerous because they want to lock you away. They want to keep you from this power that the cult has obtained and is delivered through the cult leader, who can conveniently press upon their followers to ask for favors in exchange for giving this gift. And finally, I think it's fair to say that the Cthulhu Mythos comes with its own brand of thought-terminating cliches. What is Cthulhu Fhtagn other than a whispered prophecy? A notion that the world is going to go in a particular direction and there's nothing you can do to stop it. So why question it? Why worry about what side you're on or who your allies are or what horrible things you're being asked to do in exchange for association with the Cthulhu cult? Because Cthulhu Fhtagn. At the same time, this could go a variety of different directions. There is the inherent meaninglessness of humanity within the Cthulhu Mythos, and I think that in itself is a potential well of opportunity for thought-terminating cliches. If you're able to convince somebody that life has no meaning, then whatever they do on behalf of the cult is perfectly fine. If there is no moral association with your fellow human beings, you can do anything to them that you want to. Shout and kill in new and different ways. And there really is no way to push back against those thoughts without contradicting the central tenet, which is that the world and humanity is meaningless in the grand scheme of things, a mote of dust in an uncaring universe. You could make it even more flowery by saying that Azathoth could wake up at any moment and end the dream. It's all a dream of the shrieking idiot god at the center of creation. And all it has to do is roll over and wake up. So why bother worrying about what laws or societal bonds or ethics you violated for the sake of the cult? I also think maybe things humankind was not meant to know is another thought-terminating cliche. I think that could be employed. It's kind of a meta cliche in that it is something that characters in a Lovecraftian story would experience, but also it's sort of a Lovecraftian shorthand for the reader. Something so we don't have to explain what happens next because it was something beyond human comprehension. Whether you're inside the story or playing it or reading it, the train of thought ends there. You can't really continue beyond something that was not meant to be known by human beings if you're a human being trying to know it. In a way, that signature Lovecraftian madness is itself a thought-terminating cliche. If you look at what happens to most characters in a TTRPG, if they, lose all their sanity points or what have you, They are no longer player characters. Your sheet is effectively taken away. You don't have a means to participate in the investigation further through that particular line of inquiry, through that character. So with that refresher on board, let's explore how cults have reinvented themselves in the 21st century. Let's see some examples of cults that have come out of the bunkers and compounds and into the light of day. In fact, they might be waiting for you right now. All you have to do to find them is click the right link, look at the right profile, open the right email, and their messages and promises will be right there waiting for you. Example 1. Multi-level marketing scams. Companies like Amway, Avon, Mary Kay, and Nu Skin have a lot of different terms for what they do. Common ones include multi-level marketing and direct sales. But there is one particular word that they do not like you to use when it comes to their business model, and that is pyramid scheme, because that's saying the quiet part out loud. And when you're running a cult, you utilize love bombing, the us and them dichotomy, and the thought-terminating cliches in order to avoid giving up the game, which is exactly what these companies do. One thing that Amanda Montell makes clear in her book is that cults demonstrate a separation of spirituality and religion. So not every cult has to offer you a religion along with its indoctrination. And in the case of multi-level marketing schemes, the offer is spiritual, but framed within a capitalist worldview. Be your own boss. Obtain independence. Follow your dreams. These are sentiments that are, at their core, spiritual. Everybody wants freedom. Everybody wants to pursue independence and achieve their fondest wishes. MLMs offer that. That's what they sell to their initiates. They don't talk about the soap or the skincare line or the candles or the makeup or anything like that. It's always achieving your financial dreams, utilizing the MLM as a vehicle. And in Cultish, Amanda Montell focuses in on Rich DeVos, the founder of Amway and a master of cult leader patter that could teach Jim Jones a thing or two. Let's have a listen to a few choice pieces from an audio presentation that went out to Amway distributors, followers of the Amway cult in the 1970s, and see if we don't pick up on some linguistic qualities that are very similar to the examples from Jim Jones and Marshall Applewhite that we heard in episode 10.
The whole point that I want to make with you is that not only do I not know what you could do with Amway, you don't know what you could do with Amway. And the reason some of you will never know what you might have done with this business or any other business that you might have wanted to get into is because you spent all your life talking about if only it ever happened, one of these days is gone, and you better get on with it now or shut up. People in general, and the great majority of people, talk about those opportunities, dream about things, but are unable, because they won't discipline themselves, to make something happen. And that's why I'm very sincere in this talk. I have nothing against you if you don't join this organization. I just want a commitment out of you. If you're not going to get off it and do something about it, then shut up about it. Now, that's straight talk. Don't go sobbing to your buddies when you come home from work every night and say, one of these days I'm going to really make something out of my life. One of these days I'm going to get in a business of my own. Boy, I'll tell you someday. Listen, have the beer, enjoy the day, and forget it. You haven't got enough guts to get away from the television set to go to a meeting most of the time. Listen, you love the boob tube? Ride it till it dies. Till the last flicker flicks and you shut it down for the night and somebody wakes you up and says, go to bed now. You know? And I crank you off to work in the morning, and you say, oh, I'm so glad to have a job. It's so wonderful to be able to work. Baloney. You know what you do. You come to work, grumbling, another day. How's it going? What's it in? You know, some of you got a problem right now. I don't care what your dream is. If you've ever dared to dream about doing greater things, somebody is going to tell you why you can't do it. This world is filled with people who have been telling everybody else why you can't do it. Get in business for yourself. So you see, that was built into me. And some of you in this room have had that little gnawing thing, but you've been kidding yourself. You're always waiting for that right deal to come along. Listen, let me tell you something. This is that right deal right now. And if it wasn't, see, I don't know what you can do with it, but I know one thing. If you don't try this one, you won't try the next one. And when we found an opportunity presented to us at every point in the road, we took it and did the best we could with what we had at that time. That didn't mean that was the ultimate for us or where we were going, but we never stopped trying with what we had to do it with. And you're in this room tonight because somebody's brought you here and somebody says, here's something you can try. Now do it. I'm not trying to sell you anything. You understand that? Not for me. Listen, don't get in this business for me or because I gave you a hard pitch. I'm going to eat okay tomorrow. Whether you get in this business or whether you don't, I'm here for one reason, and so is Jay. Because we have a commitment to make this country a better place and to make opportunity live for more people. And that's our goal, and that's what we work on. So don't get hung up on selling. Listen, selling's what makes this whole world go round. There are a lot of people who look down on people who are in sales. I've listened to guys, we get people who work in our factory at 80, you know, they say, oh, I know, that's selling, who wants to be a salesman? I was looking at them and I say, I'll tell you somebody better, you won't be working. Because there isn't a person in this room who works in this country who wouldn't be working if somebody didn't sell the merchandise. Because nothing happens until somebody sells something. That's the moving force that has put this country on top of the economic scale in this world.
So hopefully those audio quotes give you a sense of Rich DeVos and how he functions as, effectively a cult leader for Amway. We see him kind of pushing people away, but also pulling them toward him in that he's saying, do this or shut up and don't do it. He's using those words to try and pull people in because they don't want to be in the category of shut up and don't do it. It's effectively, it's like negging somebody. He's going to talk about the kind of people that he doesn't like so that you naturally want to be in the category of people that he does like. He's also forewarning people who are thinking of getting involved that there are people that are going to push back against them. There are people that are going to try and get them out of this commitment that they've made to Amway. In other presentations, he explicitly says that you can expect your friends and your family to push back against you, and you need to resist that. Effectively, you need to abandon the people that are close to you in order to be part of this thing that is going to give you independence and fulfill your dreams. And that is another thing that he talks about, is kind of having dreams, fulfilling dreams. And he also wraps himself in the American flag as he does it. Amway, American way. This is his principal metaphor. And he talks a lot about capitalism, and you can find presentations he does on American values and freedom and compassionate capitalism, effectively blending his brand with American identity until you can't tell the two apart, which reminds me very much of how the People's Temple hid in plain sight by moving itself to San Francisco in the 1960s and becoming one among many socialist organizations in that city. Another strategy that Rich DeVos and Amway employed was to utilize extant religious institutions that shared their values. And this became a standard operating procedure for multi-level marketing schemes. A lot of them, to this day, maintain some sort of quasi-Christian or quasi-religious values element as they market themselves. They talk about themselves being a Christian company or a company founded on Christian values. One of the largest recruiting pools for MLMs in the United States is the state of Utah, the center of the Church of Latter-day Saints, arguably a cult that has become so successful that it is practically mainstream. And what Montell argues is that this is because cults of all varieties know how to go after the same audience. If you've joined one cult, you're likely to join others. And as the revolving door of cults and scams kind of does its thing, where they ebb and flow between success and failure, clever cult leaders are always looking to capitalize on those people who have just had a negative experience and gotten out of one system in order to market theirs as a potential fix. Here's the same thing that you were experiencing with your previous MLM or your previous religious group that turned out to be a scam, and we've got the same setup for you, and we promise it's legitimate. Unlike all those other ones, we're the real deal. Montell also spends a lot of time discussing more recent iterations of the MLM. Amway is the classic example. Actually, there's one previous to Amway called Holiday Magic. And should you ever want to inquire about that, because that is a truly wild story, I highly recommend the podcast The Dollop and its episode on the founder of Holiday Magic, William Penn Patrick. It's pretty obvious I don't have a lot of kind words for someone like Rich DeVos, but I will say that he moderated himself compared to William Penn Patrick, who absolutely reveled in his position of power over a pyramid scheme. And Holiday Magic very definitely was a pyramid scheme and was legally a pyramid scheme. The whole reason that Rich DeVos had to be so careful with Amway was because William Penn Patrick and Holiday Magic absolutely were not careful. By the end of Holiday Magic's run, William Penn Patrick was essentially holding his followers hostage, forcing them to spend thousands of dollars to attend business seminars that he conducted, which, in the midst of him dispensing advice similar to what you might find Rich DeVos dispensing, he was publicly humiliating his followers. He would lock them in cages. He would lock them in coffins. He would humiliate them with sex toys. And there's even stories that come out of his seminars involving the consumption of urine and vomit. It's almost as though this guy was just trying to see what he could get away with. It was that bad by the end. But again, Dave Anthony of The Dollop tells that story way better than I ever could. In addition to discussing some of these early examples of multi-level marketing direct sales schemes, Amanda Montell also goes into the latest iterations of these schemes, which mostly involve maintaining an online kind of influencer-style presence as a means of either selling the products or, more importantly, recruiting other people to be involved in the scheme. Because that's really how the money is made in most of these cases. It's not about actually selling the products. It's convincing other people to sell the products, and then they have to buy their supply from you. The way the industry frames this, they use the jargon upline and downline. Your upline is everybody above you, including the person directly above you to whom you will typically owe a certain amount of money on a weekly or monthly basis in order to maintain your supply of the product. And that purchase of the product is built into the contract. And you also have your downline, which is anybody that you manage to recruit that then you can sell product to, which brings them into a lower tier of the scheme. Now, oddly enough, the upline typically has fewer and fewer people, the downline has more and more. And if one were to put the upline at the top of a structure and the downline at the bottom of the structure, surprise, surprise, it makes a very familiar shape. Triangular, dare I say it, pyramidal. And Montell argues that this structure is maintained through thought-terminating cliches. Specifically, thought-terminating cliches centered around positivity. An MLM Facebook group or text chat or email list is definitely a no-bummers kind of zone. You are not allowed to express negativity. You are not allowed to express doubt. If you do these things, you potentially risk popping the bubble for yourself or for others. And Montell points out that conversation in these spaces shapes itself into a pattern akin to Rhonda Byrne's The Secret, kind of the power of positive thinking, positive energy, manifesting one's success. As my old scoutmaster used to say, you're gonna smile if I have to shove a coat hanger into your mouth and make you. And so as we step back from all these factors and look at them together, a very obvious picture forms. At the top of the MLM, you have the leaders who are recruiting using a series of techniques that look a lot like love bombing, establishing an us and them dichotomy where there are enemies all around you that will stop you from being involved in the MLM, and utilizing thought-terminating cliches. And at the bottom, you have a bunch of people who are getting on board, paying upwards into the system, and are forced to smile about it no matter how much shit they have to eat. Because if they don't smile about it, they're going to get called out, and they're going to get kicked out. And they're going to be further away from the leadership, from the promises of success, independence, and fulfilled dreams. That is a cult. And if a cult can support the carefully manicured grift of someone like Rich DeVos, it can absolutely support the Cthulhu mythos. And now perhaps you're saying to me, Stephen, well, okay, sure, an MLM is a cult, but it doesn't have the religious component necessary to support the Cthulhu mythos. Well, not everything about the Cthulhu mythos has to be religion. Lovecraft showed us that. The Cthulhu mythos is as much about science fiction and science fantasy as it is about the occult and the supernatural. And MLMs are designed to advertise and promise us the wonders of science, the products of tomorrow, vitamins, health shakes, skin cream, technological wonders and advances that will cure our aches and pains and make the doldrums and miseries of everyday life vanish before our very eyes. I'm reminded of an episode of The Good Friends of Jackson Elias, where Scott Dawnward challenged listeners to create a scenario where Nyarlathotep assumes the role of a traveling salesman. I think in particular he was suggesting a vacuum salesman. And I actually tried to accomplish this at one point. I wrote a scenario along these lines. I presented it to my regular gaming group, and we actually utilized it as an introduction to the campaign Masks of Nyarlathotep, where I had already cannibalized the new Peru chapter as a chapter in a campaign made up of interconnected scenarios all set in Central and South America. So instead I had Jackson Elias feed my players some information about mysterious deaths involving a vacuum cleaner sales company, and watched as they followed the clues that led them to a cult compound, a cult leader who was kind of a failed Mr. Wizard figure who nearly burned himself to death during a World's Fair, the strange metal man that he kept in his barn and private workshop, and his plot to bring the voice of Azathoth into the world with the aid of vacuum cleaners that poked tiny holes in the space-time continuum. I called it Instruments Yet Stranger, and it was based on Lovecraft's short story Nyarlathotep. Nyarlathotep by H.P. Lovecraft. First published in the United Amateur, November 1920. Nyarlathotep, crawling chaos. I am the last. I will tell the audient void. I do not recall distinctly when it began, but it was months ago. The general tension was horrible. To a season of political and social upheaval was added a strange and brooding apprehension of hideous physical danger. A danger widespread and all-embracing. Such a danger as may be imagined only in the most terrible phantasms of the night. I recall that the people went about with pale and worried faces, and whispered warnings and prophecies which no one dared consciously repeat, or acknowledge to himself that he had heard. A sense of monstrous guilt was upon the land, and out of the abysses between the stars swept chill currents that made men shiver in dark and lonely places. There was a demoniac alteration in the sequence of the seasons. The autumn heat lingered fearsomely, and everyone felt that the world and perhaps the universe had passed from the control of known gods or forces to that of gods or forces which were unknown. And it was then that Nyarlathotep came out of Egypt. Who he was none could tell, but he was of the old native blood and looked like a pharaoh. The Fellahin knelt when they saw him, but they could not say why. He said he had risen up out of the blackness of 27 centuries, and he had heard messages from places not on this planet. Into the lands of civilization came Nyarlathotep, swarthy, slender, and sinister, always buying strange instruments of glass and metal and combining them into instruments yet stranger. He spoke much of the sciences, of electricity and psychology, and gave exhibitions of power which sent his spectators away speechless, yet which swelled his fame to exceeding magnitude. Men advised one another to see Nyarlathotep, and shuddered, and where Nyarlathotep went, rest vanished, for the small hours were rent with the screams of nightmare. Never before had the screams of nightmare been such a public problem. Now the wise men almost wished they could forbid sleep in the small hours, that the shrieks of cities might less horribly disturb the pale, pitying moon as it glimmered on green waters gliding under bridges, and old steeples crumbling against a sickly sky. I remember when Nyarlathotep came to my city, the great, the old, the terrible city of unnumbered crimes. My friend had told me of him, and of the impelling fascination and allurement of his revelations, and I burned with eagerness to explore his uttermost mysteries. My friend said they were horrible and impressive beyond my most fevered imaginings, that what was thrown on a screen in the darkened room prophesied things none but Nyarlathotep dared prophesy, and in the sputter of his sparks there was taken from men that which had never been taken before, yet which showed only in the eyes. And I heard it hinted abroad that those who knew Nyarlathotep looked on sights which others saw not. It was in the hot autumn that I went through the night with the restless crowds to see Nyarlathotep, through the stifling night and up the endless stairs into the choking room. And shadowed on a screen I saw hooded forms amidst ruins, and yellow evil faces peering from behind fallen monuments. And I saw the world battling against blackness, against the waves of destruction from ultimate space, whirling, churning, struggling around the dimming, cooling sun. Then the sparks played amazingly around the heads of the spectators, and hair stood up on end while shadows more grotesque than I can tell came out and squatted on the heads. And when I, who was colder and more scientific than the rest, mumbled a terrible protest about imposture and static electricity, Nyarlathotep drave us all out, down the dizzying stairs into the damp, hot, deserted midnight streets. I screamed aloud that I was not afraid, that I never could be afraid, and others screamed with me for solace. We swore to one another that the city was exactly the same, and still alive, and yet the electric lights began to fade, and we cursed the company over and over again, and laughed at the queer faces we made. I believe we felt something coming down from the greenish moon, for when we began to depend on its light we drifted into curious, involuntary formations, and seemed to know our destinations though we dared not think of them. Once we looked at the pavement and found the blocks loose, and displaced by grass, with scarce a line of rusted metal to show where the tramways had run. And again we saw a tram car, lone, windowless, dilapidated, and almost on its side. When we gazed around the horizon, we could not find the third tower by the river, and noticed the silhouette of the second tower was ragged at the top. Then we split up into narrow columns, each of which seemed drawn in a different direction. One disappeared in a narrow alley to the left, leaving only the echo of a shocked moan. Another filed down a weed-choked subway entrance, howling with a laughter that was mad. My own column was sucked toward the open country, and presently felt a chill that was not of the hot autumn, for as we stalked out on the dark moor, we beheld around us the hellish moon glitter of evil snows. Trackless, inexplicable snows, swept asunder in one direction only, where lay a gulf all the blacker for its glittering walls. The column seemed very thin indeed, as it plodded dreamily into the gulf. I lingered behind, for the black rift in the green-litten snow was frightful, and I thought I heard the reverberations of a disquieting wail as my companions vanished. But my power to linger was slight. As if beckoned by those who had gone before, I half floated between the titanic snowdrifts, quivering and afraid, into the sightless vortex of the unimaginable. Screamingly sentient, dumbly delirious, only the gods that were can tell. A sickened, sensitive shadow writhing in hands that are not hands, and whirled blindly past ghastly midnights of rotting creation. Corpses of dead worlds with sores that were cities, charnel winds that brush the pallid stars and make them flicker low. Beyond the world's vague ghosts of monstrous things, half-seen columns of unsanctified temples that rest on nameless rocks beneath space and reach up to dizzy vacua above the spheres of light and darkness. And through this revolting graveyard of the universe, the muffled, maddening beating of drums and thin, monotonous whine of blasphemous flutes from inconceivable, unlighted chambers beyond time, the detestable pounding and piping whereunto dance slowly, awkwardly, and absurdly the gigantic, tenebrous, ultimate gods, the blind, voiceless, mindless gargoyles whose soul is Nyarlathotep. So there's a lot to unpack in this short story or prose poem about Nyarlathotep. This is one of the handful of times where we really get to see HPL take this god out for a spin and show us as his creator what he thinks is important about the Black Pharaoh. And it may just be me because I've been giving over a lot of time to studying the words of Richard DeVos, but I see a lot of Richard DeVos in Nyarlathotep. I mean, obviously, Lovecraft didn't presage Richard DeVos, but if you think about it, I mean, the clip that I played for you was from a meeting of people considering buying in to the Amway multi-level marketing scheme. And in the same way, you get this gathering of people around Nyarlathotep. And much like Richard DeVos, Nyarlathotep is not kind to these people. When the narrator speaks out against him, Nyarlathotep tells the whole crowd to get lost and sends them off to their deaths in a version of their city that seems to be falling through the cracks into some other dimension. And both Nyarlathotep and Richard DeVos are demonstrating their own peculiar wonders. In Nyarlathotep's case, it's this kind of scientific show with electricity. And there's also talk of psychology and presumably fringe elements of that field that would have been popular in Lovecraft's day. Hypnotism, mesmerism, those ideas and concepts that blur the boundaries between science and magic. And Rich DeVos has his own carnival of wonders. He is showcasing his get-rich-quick scheme, his keys to the kingdom of capitalism, and how he can make a wealthy American success story out of any working-class individual who's willing to put in the time and the money, and of course, pay up the latter. I can't help but think about the associations of both Rich DeVos and Nyarlathotep with pyramids. There's a lot to untangle in that mixed metaphor. And just like Scott Dawnward put out the challenge to his listeners, turn Nyarlathotep into a vacuum cleaner salesman, and I tried to take him up on that. I'm going to put it to you who are listening here. Play with this notion of Nyarlathotep, the pyramid, and the pyramid scheme. I think there's something there. Another thought that I have is that we tend to think of Lovecraft as a pretty unsexy guy, a pretty asexual individual, someone who found sex and sexuality to be frightening, gross, really just kind of disinterested in the whole matter. Yet there are some very, at least in my opinion, sexual lines that are used in this prose poem. In particular, when the narrator is excited to see Nyarlathotep, he says, "I burned with eagerness to explore his uttermost mysteries." That is a very sexual way to discuss a showcase of scientific wonders, and it puts me in mind of the two protagonists in The Hound, another story that I'll get to eventually, who are exploring the fringes of the occult and every kind of damnable, sinful thing that they could possibly do, and it just implies that they were lovers on top of being cohorts in matters of scholarship or matters of occult scholarship. At the same time, the conclusion is full of stifling heat, wandering around as though intoxicated, and lots of people disappearing into vacuous spaces and moaning about it. For me, I just read this with a layer of sexual tension, maybe not intended, but it's there, and also a layer of homoeroticism, as it's all men advising each other about this mysterious figure, Nyarlathotep, arguably another man, and a very fine-looking man, who comes out of strange and ancient places. And that sort of sexual magnetism is a very culty thing. Cult leaders want control of their followers' lives, and to exhibit control over somebody's sex life is to dominate them deeply. Dominance and submission are a thread that run through human sex and sexuality. We need only look at expressions of kink and fetish culture to see that writ large. And so cult leaders exhibit all kinds of sexual control over their followers. I mean, in the case of Jim Jones, he decided who could couple, who was going to couple with him, who could have sex and when. These were things that he exhibited total control over. With Marshall Applewhite, he deadened sex and sexuality within his cult. He eliminated it. He even went so far as to foist castration, chemical and otherwise, on his followers, especially after his co-leader died suddenly of cancer and left him in shock. Amanda Montell actually points out that frequently a cis male cult leader will have an inner circle of women surrounding him, creating a buffer from the rest of the followers, unless he chooses to reach through that circle and pull in another follower, another attractive woman, to join the group. I mean, this was very much a pattern with Jim Jones, and we see it repeated even in contemporary, like the Nixium trafficking scandal, and a number of other cult-like organizations in the health and wellness field, which we're going to get into now. Example number 2. Health and wellness gurus and miracle products. I want to cover predatory gurus like Bikram Choudhury and scammy skincare products in the same category because they are two different approaches to the same issue. One thing about cults that you need to give them credit for is they recognize human needs. They just offer a false hope of fulfilling those needs. So when people go to someone like Jim Jones or Marshall Applewhite seeking love and purpose and support and acceptance, we can't really fault them for wanting those things, because those things are things that every human being wants. And the same is the case with bodily health and wellness. Everybody wants to be healthy. Everybody wants to live a long, healthy life. It's not surprising that people jump at the chance to achieve that when it's offered. And because I'm a bit of a misanthrope, I'm also going to say it's not surprising that there are people offering it who very definitely can't give it, but are willing to take your money all the same. The 21st century has seen a new explosion in fitness trends. All these different options for workouts that promise to transform your life, to provide you longevity, to provide you health and wellness beyond the expected peaks and troughs we know to be facts about human aging. For good or for ill, we understand the truth of our condition. The body grows, and then the body dies. And we are forced to sit through the roller coaster that is this journey, knowing where it leads. But what if someone comes along and says, I can take away that existential dread you're feeling. I can not only extend your life, but I can give you renewed life and renewed vigor in your declining years. Well, that person is either a miracle worker or a liar, because they're making promises that exist outside the bounds of the human condition. And this is what makes the health guru a real danger, because they are taking the techniques of Rich DeVos, and they are trying to sell you the one thing money can't buy. There are a lot of medical marvels for sale these days. Drugs, surgeries, new organs. There are people that will happily take your money to cut your face off and pull the wrinkles out and stitch it back onto your skull. But no matter how much you spend, you don't stop the march of time. And everyone knows that. But if you can convince a person that you can take away their existential dread, well, then you'd probably have tremendous power over them. They'd probably give you anything you wanted. Money would just be the beginning. You'd be able to assert the kind of control that Jim Jones and Marshall Applewhite asserted over their followers. Their life would be yours if you promised to extend it. But who could possibly be so bold as to make an offer like, I will extend your life. I will let you live eternally. I will take away the fear of aging. Who could possibly have the gall and the nerve to say something so outlandish? Well, let's listen to an interview with Bikram Choudhury, the inventor of Bikram Hot Yoga, and currently on the run from active warrants in the United States, as well as more than $7 million worth of damages owed to previous victims, for charges including fraud, harassment, sexual battery, and false imprisonment.
This particular yoga is a series of 26 hatha yoga postures performed in a 40-degree heated room, which he likes to call the torture chamber, for 90 minutes. Bikram has been practicing yoga since the tender age of 3, but at the age of 20 he was told he would never walk again after a weightlifting accident. With the help of his guru Vishnu Ghosh, he recovered by practicing yoga, and within 6 months he'd fully recovered.
So Bikram Yoga is a healing process for people who suffer with chronic disease for years and years and years and years and years, like a heart problem, neurological problem, a spinal problem, like a diabetes, thyroid problem, emotional problem, any kind of chronic disease when people has, they tried everything in their life, and medical science give up, and they end up with me. And I cure them. You come 20 years, 30 years, you're in a wheelchair. And then you meet me, you come to me. Of course, I totally cure you, whatever the problem you have. Plus, I, like you said, transform their life to another human being. They're reborn once again. In Bengali idiom we call punarjanam. Means you born one second time, in one lifetime, a different human being. That's why Bikram Yoga does. And my guru told everybody, he sees I have something by birth, so he modified, he molded, he created, the same way. And Hollywood said, Hollywood entertain the world and make money. And Bikram entertain Hollywood and make money out of them. So I'm an entertainer, yes. I entertain people. When people in pain, they give up everything. They never smile 30 years. I make them laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh. I mean...
Even when they're struggling in class?
Struggling in class, that's my specialty. Never too bad, never too late, never too old, never too sick. By entertaining, I make this yoga subject so interesting. People like it, and it works.
It does work.
You know that, yes. I want my legacy. Everybody should do yoga, Bikram yoga, in this world. They never have to go to doctor. They never lose their mind. They never have to divorce. They never will broke financially. They will not any physical and mental problem. They will leave assurance from me, my country, India. As long as they want, they can live. Any way they want, they can live. No hatred, no fighting, no spitting in the sky, no pissing in the wind, no jumping from frying pan to the fire. Those are the things you can get rid of it in a minute if you decided to do a Bikram yoga class. That's my legacy.
Bold claims. I'm particularly surprised at the interviewer from Phuket News who just kind of lets him go. There's no small number of people claiming that Bikram Choudhury ran a cult in the United States and continues those practices abroad. But he certainly wasn't alone, and Amanda Montell points out that Bikram Yoga was just one of a handful of fitness trends that encouraged a cult-like atmosphere, almost as a subtle advertising technique. As the waves of horror from events like Jonestown and the Heaven's Gate mass suicide died down in the United States, calling something culty or cult-like started to imply it was edgy, that it was non-conformist, non-traditional, rebellious from the mainstream. People started to seek out things that were culty in quality. And a lot of small exercise studios started to build their brands based on this idea. And often these studios would push a program that exceeded the risk profile of mainstream gyms. People would start to talk about them for this reason. Oh, you need to try Bikram hot yoga. You need to try CrossFit. It will really kick your ass. You'll throw up at the end of every workout, but you'll feel great afterwards. And in cultivating this kind of edgier, risk-taking crowd, these studios also cultivated riskier, edgier relationships between professionals and clients. In some cases, like Bikram Choudhury, it was one person at the head of the cult, one person who was doing all the predatory work. Montell identifies Bikram Choudhury as a fairly typical cult leader who would surround himself with a buffer of women he was already preying on and utilize them to go hunting for new victims. Meanwhile, other non-traditional workout studios were so focused on maintaining their edgy culture and reputation that they unknowingly or perhaps knowingly invited predators in to take advantage of the space and the risky environment they'd set up as a means to attract clients. You saw this with SoulCycle. The corporate leaders of SoulCycle were not themselves predators, but they hired predators over and over, and often gave them passes when their predation became obvious because these predators were also popular and were helping them maintain clients and maintain the flow of profit and the expansion of the business. So just like with Rich DeVos, Amway, other MLM schemes, we have an example here of a cult doing culty things, but not necessarily a religion. Certainly we could say that exercise or fitness might be a spiritual practice. I mean, it certainly provides fulfillment to the people that take part in it. Just like chasing the American dream and owning your own independent business might be an example of spiritual fulfillment. But how do we take this new framework for cults and combine it with the framework of cosmic horror? I can see one opportunity immediately, but I don't necessarily like it. The Lovecraftian circle, like a lot of elements of culture from the early 20th century, intersected with Orientalism. Now, as I've said in previous shows, when I use the phrase Orientalism, I'm using it specifically the way Edward Said used it. A romanticized fixation on non-Western culture. There were folks in the Lovecraft circle like E. Hoffman Price, for instance, and maybe Clark Ashton Smith as well to a degree, who would have called themselves Orientalists, or claimed to be interested in Orientalism. And from their perspective, they were understanding and interpreting Eastern culture for a Western audience. But this is not true. They were romantic about it. They had outsized, fabulous, and often racist notions about what it meant to be a person that was from an Asian or Southeast Asian country. And they often imported so-called Eastern culture into their lives in a very kitschy, over-the-top way. But this wasn't just the guilty pleasure of science fiction and fantasy writers of the early 20th century. Fitness enthusiasts 100 years ago were also thinking along the same lines, and this is how you get the importation of martial arts and yoga into Western health and wellness culture. It's important to think about the yoga and martial arts that we see in the Western world not as direct transplants, but rather westernized versions of Eastern culture that are made palatable for an outsider audience. The yoga that is taught in yoga studios in New York and Los Angeles is not the yoga that was a philosophical and spiritual practice in India dating back thousands of years. The poses and practices have been stripped of their cultural context and turned into a Western exercise routine. And it is a very common practice, still to this day, to package Eastern culture for a Western audience. And so knowing this, my cruel and calculating mind that is always meditating upon cosmic horror starts to think, you could package any set of movements and meditations into a workout routine and call it yoga. What's to stop some mad sorcerer from putting the Dona formula into the midst of his sun salutations and selling it as the latest and greatest Eastern health craze? Do yoga at my studio and you'll see things. Granted, what you see won't be inner peace, and, it probably won't tone your glutes all that much, but you'll definitely sweat looking at the city at the center of the earth and all the horrors it contains. So that's one option. You can take this ingrained Orientalism that surrounds practices like yoga, and you can use it as a lever to put cosmic horror into your storytelling. I only hesitate because of what Brian Talwara said to me, and I then repeated a couple of episodes ago. Is this necessary? Can we tell this same sort of story without using a trope that potentially reflects negatively on non-Western culture? I think presenting a game or a story with that kind of content would require a certain amount of personal investigation and interrogation on my part. So what if instead we take a more westernized version of one of these extreme exercise programs and put it through the cult filter and try and combine it with a cosmic horror framework? Well, to be honest, I'm not really thrilled by the results my imagination brings me. I picture a group of wine moms in an extreme spin class, similar to, say, Soul Cycle or something like that, with a sexy instructor in too tight spandex, encouraging these women to spin their towels over their heads and scream, "Iya, iya, shub niguroth," and it doesn't jive with me. I don't dig on that image. There's a humor to it that I think could be played with, but it's just not really my thing. However, the qualities of some of these classes, particularly if you look at, I've already mentioned the dollop once on this episode, but they also have a piece on the rise and fall of Soul Cycle that I think is particularly good. And if you look at the fascist qualities of some of these non-traditional workouts, starting with the idea that, say, they're encouraging people to get up at 6 a.m. and go to something called boot camp, I think maybe you could introduce cosmic horror into this framework that is a little bit more politically resonant. And that's when I start to think of Alison Rumfit and Tell Me I'm Worthless, and how she transformed a very politically driven narrative into a narrative of supernatural horror that communicated the political messaging through the experience of haunting. So maybe like Tell Me I'm Worthless, you have the compounding of political philosophies in a particular place or surrounding a particular context. Maybe the fascist kind of drill instructor style of the CrossFit gym or the boot camp is just the latest iteration of a fascism that goes deeper. And your investigators or protagonists who are involved in this fitness practice can explore the space a little bit. Maybe the place where the CrossFit gym now resides previously housed a bar that was for decades a gathering place for neo-Nazis. Maybe before that, it was the location of a storefront church with a really fucked up preacher spreading really terrible racist rhetoric during the Great Depression, something like that. And before that, perhaps it was the site of a tree where lynchings occurred. You can play around with it. You can add layers. If you haven't read Tell Me I'm Worthless, I would really recommend it as a resource and a roadmap for horror that takes place in a contemporary and politically charged setting. But I said this section was about health gurus and miracle products, and we haven't really talked much about miracle products. In her book Cultish, Amanda Montell folds the skin routines and fad diets and anti-aging serums in under her chapter regarding multi-level marketing, because when she reviews these things, she sees them as an extension of the cult-like multi-level marketing scheme that has its roots with Rich DeVos and Amway. And I agree that they fit the mold. They are definitely products that extend out of that tradition of multi-level marketing schemes, and they definitely belong in Amanda Montell's kind of boss babe chapter, where she's talking about how old friends from high school utilize the internet as a tool for recruiting levels below them in multi-level marketing schemes. But there is a facet of these products that makes them more appropriate for the segment we're talking about with health and wellness, because just like the workouts of Bikram Choudhury and other exercise gurus, these products are making a promise to stop time, to reverse aging, to undo the damage of the human condition. And more importantly, I don't think Amanda Montell ever saw the episode of Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities called The Outside. Now, this is an hour-long horror story that made its first appearance in 2022 on the aforementioned Netflix series. It's directed by Anna Lily Amirpour. The writing is done by Haley Z. Boston, but the story actually has its origins in a webcomic called Some Other Animals Meet by Emily Carroll. In both tellings, you get a feminist horror story, where skin lotion acts as a supernatural artifact. In the TV version, there's kind of an alien or otherworldly sales pitch, and there's more attention paid to the idea of fitting in with the dominant, vapid culture that surrounds beauty and beauty products. In the webcomic, which I'll certainly post a link to, and it's available for free online, personally, I feel like the skin cream product has more of a shoggoth feel to it, and that this sentient product is seeking to merge with the main character. It sort of gives her a positive sense of self in exchange for her sacrificing herself to it and effectively giving it a human life to live. In both cases, Aloe Glow, the product in question, is presented as belonging to the catalog of a multi-level marketing scheme. In the narrative stories, there's no explanation given for where this product comes from, who's selling it, and why, but those are certainly things that you could explore in an investigative horror TTRPG. And the kind of fawning, vapid cult of beauty that comes along with the product becomes just another layer to explore as you go deeper and deeper into the mystery. I think it could be a great opportunity to bring the kind of feminist horror that we are seeing in the indie gaming space into those more popular cosmic horror-based TTRPGs, Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, even something like Cult Divinity Lost, and it's just there for the taking. Example number 3, online gurus. Given that we're separating the spiritual from the religious, this category could easily include everybody from the Kardashians to Andrew Tate. But in the final chapter of Cultish, Amanda Montell cleaves to a definition of online guru that stays close to the ephemeral and the otherworldly. And so she focuses on figures who are offering assistance to lost souls, navigating an empty and complex modern world that is full of trauma and exploitation, and very empty when it comes to closeness to the divine. During the COVID pandemic, a lot of New Age figures moved online as a way to obtain followers and spread their teachings. And many of them discovered a hunger for attention and a need for healing that would allow them to make tremendous profits without having to appear in public. They could capture thousands of views on a live stream. They could offer their courses on platforms like Zoom, and they could find followers who would do their marketing for them through viral media and video compilations. Montell in particular focuses on one controversial figure that definitely has culty red flags all around her, a New Age teacher named Teal Swan. Swan blends contemporary conspiracy rhetoric with claims about knowing her past lives, psychic powers, and knowledge of indigenous ritual practices, all with the aim of selling her followers a mental health cure-all that will allow them to overcome the trauma that is preventing them from living an authentic and enlightened life. After reviewing the contents of Montell's book, as well as some of Teal Swan's videos and documentaries about her, my personal opinion is that this is a grifter who is practicing mental health care without a license and without a net. A lot of people could be hurt by this woman and what she is doing, and there's already evidence that some people have been hurt, and all in the name of a practice that aims to protect the Teal Swan brand first and worry about others' mental health needs second. Now, my thoughts and opinions on Teal Swan aside, this individual and people like her are a very real part of contemporary internet culture, and they reflect a new approach to an old problem, utilizing methods and ideas that are older still. And because of this, we can actually look at some of the claims that Teal Swan makes, and we can tie them back to Lovecraft and his world. And through those ties, we can potentially bring cosmic horror forward into our contemporary space. So one claim that Teal Swan and others like her make is association or access to a spiritual phenomenon called the Akashic Records. Depending on who tells the story, this is either a place or another dimension or a source of enlightenment that leads one to have access to the library of universal knowledge. And this actually ties back into our previous example of health and wellness gurus, in that the Akashic Records are something steeped in the trappings of Eastern mysticism, but they have a thoroughly Western origin. The Akashic Records are the creation of Theosophy and specifically Helena Blavatsky, a spiritual teacher and con artist from the late 19th century and early 20th century, who planted some of the seeds of the New Age movement by romanticizing Eastern philosophy and religion. And if we're being honest, is probably the philosophical ancestry of Teal Swan and her ilk, rather than any ascended masters or angels or aliens modern New Agers purport to descend from these days. And just like people today are discussing Teal Swan's spiritual practices online, the Lovecraft Circle was discussing the rituals and lore of Theosophy back in their day. Here's a short exchange between Clark Ashton Smith and HPL from the second volume of Dawnward, Spire, Lonely Hill. March 1st, 1933, Clark Ashton Smith writing to HPL. The Book of Dizyan is new to me. I haven't read any great amount of theosophical literature. I'll be vastly interested in any dope you or Price can pass on to me. Theosophy, as far as I can gather, is a version of esoteric yoga, prepared for Western consumption. So I dare say its legendary must have some sort of basis in ancient Oriental records. One can disregard the theosophy and make good use of the stuff about elder continents, etc. I got my own ideas about Hyperborea, Poseidonus, etc. from such sources, and then turned my imagination loose. On March 15th, 1933, HPL writes to Clark Ashton Smith, "By this time you'll have received the forwarded matter from Price to be sent to Barlow. I am very curious about this holy city of Shambhala, said to exist unimpaired somewhere in the Gobi, though built by the Lemurians, or third root race several million years ago. It is here that the Book of Dizyan, parts of which are older than the earth, is kept. Shambhala would make a splendid fictional theme. I wonder if any theosophists or Hindus pretend to have visited it. As you say, the theosophic myth cycle is probably based on ancient Indian lore, with certain 19th century accessions. Price mentions A.P. Sinnett's Esoteric Buddhism, Besant's Pedigree of Man, Ledbetter's Inner Life, and Blavatsky's Secret Doctrine in his bibliography. I've read none of these. To which might be added Scott Eliot's Atlantis and the Lost Lemuria, which I read some years ago. I think I must do some research along this line, when I get the time. I found Scott Eliot quite an imaginative stimulus." On March 24th, 1933, HPL writes to Clark Ashton Smith, "The notion of the Akashic Records is indeed a unique one, but I don't think there's much ground for assuming any truth in these tales. To begin with, they assume an antiquity for mankind which is against all the indications of paleontology and geology. As for the pineal gland, modern endocrinology has fairly well established its actual function in the human system as a regulator of the chemical and biological changes attending adolescence and maturity. But surely the legends lose nothing in picturesqueness and imaginative value, being merely legends." Later in the same letter, HPL adds, "From something Price adds, I take it Blavatsky is the best authority, and meant the Book of Dizyan, not Dizan, as I first carelessly transcribed it. Accounts of Holy Shambhala would seem to vary, but it's great fictional stuff in any form." On the 8th of April 1933, HPL writes to Clark Ashton Smith, "What you say of the Theosophy cycle and of the special, fictionally developed features interests me tremendously. I simply must look up Blavatsky, Besant, Ledbetter, Sinnott, etc. One could, as you say, derive a whole canon of tales from it. It seems to make my Yog-Sothoth stuff pallid by comparison. These Akashic records tickle my imagination. It is from them, of course, that the Book of Ibon and the Narcotic manuscripts were first devised. So as much as these gurus can be vexing and frustrating as we look at the societal and political landscape, their ramblings and exploits can absolutely be mined for fictional material. There are multiple versions of the Akashic records that make themselves known in the works of the Lovecraft Circle. I would say the award for the most direct pull actually goes to August Derleth and his creation, the Library of Solano. Now, this is normally where I would read an excerpt from a Derleth piece like The House on Kerwin Street or The Watcher from the Sky, both of which mention the Library of Solano. And just like with Lair of the Starspawn, I really wanted to include some of Derleth's work here to illustrate the point. But I can't. I just can't. The man's work is atrocious. It's embarrassing. Trying to ape Lovecraft through laundry lists of nonsensical Cthulhu Mythos words, it's just abysmal. I don't want this to devolve into some fan opinion of mine. I don't want to die on this hill alone. If somebody has some piece of August Derleth's work that they think is actually good and competent and wants to present it to me, I'll take it seriously. I'm very much aware of the opinions of Scott Dawnward of the Good Friends of Jackson Elias and Rob Poynton of the Innsmouth Book Club, and I agree, without Derleth we don't get HPL. And his role in the Lovecraft Circle is critical, not just for his publishing after he died, but for the advocacy he did on Lovecraft's behalf while he was alive. I was just listening to Rob and Tim Mendes the other day talking about how he was kicking in doors on Farnsworth Wright to get Lovecraft published in Weird Tales. I recognize that Derleth is important, but he himself is just a dreadful writer. And then there's all the stuff where he tries to make a mythology out of the Cthulhu Mythos. He tries to build in a structure that's just, why? Why, August? Why? So instead I'm going to compromise, and I'm going to whip out my handy Cthulhu Mythos Encyclopedia by the wonderful Daniel Harms, who has written a couple of well-synthesized definitions that can tell us about the Library of Solano and a Necronomicon-style fictional publication associated with it. Here we go. Solano. One of the 7 stars in the Pleiades. On Solano's 4th planet lies the Great Library of Solano, where the lore stolen by the Great Old Ones from the Elder Gods is kept. Just how the information is stored is unclear. Some references indicate that it is held on books and tablets, but others assert that the Elder lore rests in living organisms designed for that purpose. Visitors to the library should bear the sign of the Elder Ones, and not remove any written knowledge from the library, lest the Sleeper of the Lake prevent their escape. The noted scholar Laban Shrewsbury spent much time here, and may have deciphered the Solano fragments from stone tablets he found in this place. Solano is an actual star, though no one has ever reported a huge library being found nearby. I am not sure why Derleth chose this particular star, but it is possible he was considering a link between the Baiaki and the Harpies of Greek myth, whose queen, Solano, is mentioned in the Aeneid. The Solano Fragments. Transcript deposited at the Miskatonic University Library in 1915 by Dr. Laban Shrewsbury, who disappeared shortly thereafter. Shrewsbury had seen the original broken stone tablets in the Great Library of Solano, and left behind notes which he claimed were a translation of the fragments, which dated back to at least the mid-Triassic period. Archaeological expeditions have subsequently turned up stone shards inscribed with portions of the fragments, and a copy also turned up later in the Amos Tuttle bequest made to the Miskatonic University Library. The fragments are short, constituting only 50 pages of Shrewsbury's notes. In most respects, they are quite close to the Elkdown shards and the Narcotic fragments in content. They may include information on the King in Yellow and Carcosa, and a small amount of data on the Deep Ones. So that's the Library of Soleno, one option for adding in a cosmic horror style Akashic records into TTRPGs and other forms of storytelling. But I don't think August Derleth developed this idea on his own. I think he was likely aping HPL, who was talking to Clark Ashton Smith, E. Hoffman Price, and probably multiple other correspondents about theosophy and ideas like the Akashic records and pre-human species, just as he was beginning to write The Shadow Out of Time. And in The Shadow Out of Time, we see Lovecraft's version of the Akashic records. And it is a truly alien construction that sits outside of human space and time, and yet within it, such that some unfortunate human beings can participate in the cataloging project against their will, only to be returned and to have it live eternally in their nightmares. From The Shadow Out of Time by H.P. Lovecraft, 1936. 4. I continued, however, to keep a careful record of the outre dreams which crowded upon me so thickly and vividly. Such a record, I argued, was of genuine value as a psychological document. The glimpses still seemed damnably like memories, though I fought off this impression with a goodly measure of success. In writing, I treated the phantasmata as things seen, but at all other times I brushed them aside like any gossamer illusions of the night. I had never mentioned such matters in common conversation, though reports of them, filtering out as such things will, had aroused sundry rumors regarding my mental health. It is amusing to reflect that these rumors were confined wholly to laymen, without a single champion among physicians or psychologists. Of my visions after 1914, I will here mention only a few, since fuller accounts and records are at the disposal of the serious student. It is evident with the time the curious inhibitions somewhat waned, for the scope of my visions vastly increased. They have never, though, become other than disjointed fragments seemingly without clear motivation. Within the dreams I seemed to gradually acquire a greater and greater freedom of wandering. I floated through many strange buildings of stone, going from one to the other along mammoth underground passages, which seemed to form the common avenues of transit. Sometimes I encountered those gigantic sealed trapdoors in the lowest level, around which an aura of fear and forbiddenness clung. I saw tremendous tessellated pools, and rooms of curious and inexplicable utensils of myriad sorts. Then there were colossal caverns of intricate machinery, whose outlines and purpose were wholly strange to me, and whose sound manifested itself only after many years of dreaming. I may here remark that sight and sound are the only senses I have exercised in the visionary world. The real horror began in May 1915, when I first saw the living things. This was before my studies had taught me what, in view of the myths and case histories, to expect. As mental barriers wore down, I beheld great masses of thin vapor in various parts of the building and in the streets below. These steadily grew more solid and distinct, till at last I could trace their monstrous outlines with uncomfortable ease. They seemed to be enormous iridescent cones, about 10 feet high and 10 feet wide at the base, and made up of some ridgy, scaly, semi-elastic matter. From their apexes projected 4 flexible cylindrical members, each a foot thick, and of a ridgy substance like that of the cones themselves. These members were sometimes contracted almost to nothing, and sometimes extended to any distance up to about 10 feet. Terminating 2 of them were enormous claws or nippers. At the end of the third were 4 red trumpet-like appendages. The fourth terminated in an irregular yellowish globe, some 2 feet in diameter, and having 3 great dark eyes ranged along its central circumference. Surmounting this head were 4 slender gray stalks, bearing flower-like appendages, whilst from its nether side dangled 8 greenish antennae or tentacles. The great base of the central cone was fringed with a rubbery gray substance, which moved the whole entity through expansion and contraction. Their actions, though harmless, horrified me even more than their appearance, for it is not wholesome to watch monstrous objects doing what one has known only human beings to do. These objects moved intelligently around the great rooms, getting books from the shelves and taking them to great tables, or vice versa, and sometimes writing diligently with a pen-like rod gripped in the greenish head tentacles. The huge nippers were used in carrying books and in conversation, speech consisting of a kind of clicking and scraping. The objects had no clothing, but wore satchels or knapsacks suspended from the top of the conical trunk. They commonly carried their head and its supporting member at the level of the cone top, although it was frequently raised or lowered. The other three great members tended to rest downwards on the sides of the cone, contracted to about 5 feet each when not in use. From their rate of reading and writing and operating their machines, those on the table seemed somehow connected with thought. I concluded that their intelligence was enormously greater than man's. Afterward I saw them everywhere, swarming in all the great chambers and corridors, tending monstrous machines in vaulted crypts, and racing along vast roads in gigantic boat-shaped cars. I ceased to be afraid of them, for they seemed to form supremely natural parts of their environment. Individual differences amongst them began to be manifest, and a few appeared to be under some great restraint. These latter, though showing no physical variation, had a diversity of gestures and habits which marked them off not only from the majority, but very largely from one another. They wrote a great deal in what seemed to my cloudy vision a vast variety of characters, never the typical curvilinear hieroglyphs of the majority. A few, I fancied, used our own familiar alphabet. Most of them worked much more slowly than the general mass of the entities. All this time my own part in the dream seemed to be that of a disembodied consciousness, with a range of vision wider than the normal, floating freely about, yet confined to the ordinary avenues and speeds of travel. Not until August 1915 did any suggestions of bodily existence begin to harass me. I say harass because the first phase was a purely abstract, though infinitely terrible association of my previously noted body loathing with the scenes of my visions. For a while, my chief concern during the dreams was to avoid looking down at myself, and I recall how grateful I was for the total absence of large mirrors in the strange rooms. I was mightily troubled by the fact that I always saw the great tables, whose height could not be under 10 feet, from a level not below that of their surfaces. And then the morbid temptation to look down at myself became greater and greater, till one night I could not resist. At first my downward glance revealed nothing whatever. A moment later I perceived that this was because my head lay at the end of a flexible neck of enormous length. Retracting this neck and gazing down very sharply, I saw the scaly, rugose, iridescent bulk of a vast cone 10 feet tall and 10 feet wide at the base. That was when I waked half of Arkham with my screaming as I plunged madly up from the abyss of sleep. Only after weeks of hideous repetition did I grow half reconciled to these visions of myself in monstrous form. In the dreams I now moved bodily among the other unknown entities, reading terrible books from the endless shelves, and writing for hours at the great tables with a stylus, managed by the green tentacles that hung down from my head. Snatches of what I read and wrote would linger in my memory. There were horrible annals of other worlds and other universes, and of stirrings of formless life outside of all universes. There were records of strange orders of beings, which had peopled the world in forgotten pasts, and frightful chronicles of grotesque-bodied intelligences, which would people it millions of years after the death of the last human being. And I learned of chapters in human history whose existence no scholar of today had ever suspected. Most of these writings were in the language of the hieroglyphs, which I Strange forms housed similarly captured minds. I seemed to talk in some odd language of claw clickings with exiled intellects from every corner of the solar system. There was a mind from the planet we know as Venus, which would live incalculable epochs to come, and one from an outer moon of Jupiter 6 million years in the past. Of earthly minds there were some from a winged, star-headed, half-vegetable race of Paleogean Antarctica, one from a reptile people of fabled Velusia, 3 from the furry pre-human Hyperborean worshippers of Sathagwa, 1 from the wholly abominable Chochos, 2 from the arachnid denizens of Earth's last age, 5 from the hardy Coleopterus species immediately following mankind, to which the great race was some day to transfer its keenest minds en masse, in the face of horrible peril, and several from different branches of humanity. I talked with the mind of Yang Li, a philosopher from the cruel empire of San Chan, which is to come in AD 500, with that of a general of the great-headed brown people who held South Africa in BC 50,000, with that of a 12th century Florentine monk named Bartolomeo Corsi, with that of a king of Lomar, who had ruled that terrible polar land 100,000 years before the squat, yellow Inutos came from the west to engulf it, with that of Nug Soth, a magician of the Dark Conquerors of AD 16,000, with that of a Roman named Titus Sempronius Blasus, who had been a questor in Sulla's time, with that of Kephnus, an Egyptian of the 14th dynasty who told me the hidden secret of Nyarlathotep, with that of a priest of Atlantis' Middle Kingdom, with that of a Suffolk gentleman from Cromwell's day, James Woodville, with that of a court astronomer of pre-Inca Peru, with that of the Australian physicist Neville Kingston Brown, who will die in AD 2518, with that of an archmage of vanished Ye in the Pacific, with that of Theodotides, a Greco-Bactrian official of BC 200, with that of an aged Frenchman of Louis XIII's time, named Pierre-Louis Montmagny, and that of Crom Ya, a Sumerian chieftain of BC 1500, and with so many others that my brain cannot hold all the shocking secrets and dizzying marvels I learned from them. I awakened each morning in a fever, sometimes frantically trying to verify or discredit such information as fell within the range of modern human knowledge. Traditional facts took on new and doubtful aspects, and I marveled at the dream fancy which could invent such surprising addenda to history and science. I shivered at the mysteries the past may conceal, and trembled at the menaces the future may bring forth. What was hinted at in the speech of post-human entities of the fate of mankind produced such an effect on me that I will not set it down here. After man there would be the mighty beetle civilization, bodies of whose members the cream of the great race would seize when the monstrous doom overtook the elder world. Later, as the Earth's span closed, the transferred minds would again migrate through time and space, to another stopping place in the bodies of the bulbous vegetable entities of Mercury. But there would be races after them, clinging pathetically to the cold planet and burrowing to its horror-filled core before the utter end. Meanwhile, in my dreams, I wrote endlessly in that history of my own age which I was preparing, half voluntarily and half through promises of increased library and travel opportunities, for the great race's central archives. The archives were in a colossal subterranean structure near the city's center, which I came to know well through frequent labors and consultations, meant to last as long as the race, and to withstand the fiercest of Earth's convulsions. This Titan repository surpassed all other buildings in the massive, mountainous-like firmness of its construction. The records, written or printed on great sheets of curiously tenacious cellulose fabric, were bound into books that opened from the top, and were kept in individual cases of a strange, extremely light, rustless metal of grayish hue, decorated with mathematical designs, and bearing the title in the great race's curvilinear hieroglyphs. These cases were stored in tiers of rectangular vaults, like closed, locked shelves, wrought of the same rustless metal, and fastened by knobs with intricate turnings. My own history was assigned a specific place in the vaults of the lowest or vertebrate level, the section devoted to the culture of mankind, and of furry and reptilian races immediately preceding it in terrestrial dominance. But none of the dreams ever gave me a full picture of daily life. All were the merest misty, disconnected fragments. It is certain that these fragments were not unfolded in their rightful sequence. I have, for example, a very imperfect idea of my own living arrangements in the dream world. Though I seem to have possessed a great stone room of my own, my restrictions as a prisoner gradually disappeared, so that some of the visions included vivid travels over the mighty jungle roads, sojourns in strange cities, and explorations of some of the vast, dark, windowless ruins from which the great race shrank in curious fear. There were also long sea voyages in enormous many-decked boats of incredible swiftness, and trips over wild regions in closed projectile-like airships, lifted and moved by electrical repulsion. Beyond the wide, warm ocean were other cities of the great race, and on one far continent I saw the crude villages of black-snouted winged creatures who would evolve as the dominant stock after the great race had sent its foremost minds into the future to escape the creeping horror. Flatness and exuberant green life were always the keynote of the scene. Hills were low and sparse, and usually displayed signs of volcanic forces. Of the animals I saw, I could write volumes. All were wild, for the great race's mechanized culture had long since done away with domestic beasts, while food was wholly vegetable or synthetic. Clumsy reptiles of great bulk floundered in steaming morasses, fluttered in heavy air, or spouted in the seas and lakes, and among these I fancied I could vaguely recognize lesser archaic prototypes of many forms: dinosaurs, pterodactyls, ichthyosaurs, labyrinthodonts, rhamphorhynisi, plesiosaurs, and the like, made familiar through paleontology. Of birds or mammals there were none that I could discern. The ground and swamps were constantly alive with snakes, lizards, and crocodiles, while insects buzzed incessantly amidst the lush vegetation. And far out at sea, unspied and unknown monsters spouted mountainous columns of foam into the vaporous sky. Once I was taken under the ocean in a gigantic submarine vessel with searchlights, and glimpsed some living horrors of awesome magnitude. I saw also the ruins of incredible sunken cities, and the wealth of crinoid, brachiopod, coral, and ichthytic life which everywhere abounded. Of the physiology, psychology, folkways, and detailed history of the great race my visions preserved but little information, and many of the scattered points I here set down were gleaned from my study of old legends, and other cases rather than my own dreaming. For in time, of course, my reading and research caught up with and passed the dreams in many phases, so that certain dream fragments were explained in advance and formed verifications of what I had learned. This consolingly established my belief that similar reading and research, accomplished by my secondary self, had formed the source of the whole terrible fabric of pseudo-memories. So we need only look back to the creations of Lovecraft and his circle and pull on that thread to bring the Cthulhu mythos forward into our present day, and cryptic, conspiratorial New Age influencers like Teal Swan and her ilk become potential vectors for the great race of Yith and their long-term project of cataloging the histories of Earth's various species. I mean, the scenario writes itself practically. It starts in a group therapy session where a group of people with missing time and fugue states and strange behaviors that alienated their families have gathered together to commiserate. One member of the group happens to mention that there's this guru who creates online content with lore and stories that sound very much like the shared experiences of the player characters. There is indication that this guru is in contact with the creatures that are behind the disruptions in the player characters' lives. The second act is a trip to her compound in Costa Rica and an encounter with the guru and her followers. And the third act takes place in the Paleozoic or Mesozoic epoch. Or perhaps the Paleozoic or Mesozoic epoch comes to Costa Rica. It certainly wouldn't be the first time that sort of thing has happened.
Welcome to Jurassic Park.
Thank you, Richard Attenborough. Montell's final thoughts in Cultish discuss social media and its propensity to create ideological sects. It seems built for that. It seems built to put users in ideological boxes and give them the kind of information that they seek in exchange for their engagement. Moreover, she ends the book on a quote from Tara Isabella Burton, saying that America is not secular, but simply spiritually self-focused. In short, we love our little boxes, and we get our little boxes through the bigger box of social media. We have an impulse to follow because we want to belong. Cosmic horrors might be aliens from beyond space and time, or creatures from other dimensions that we cannot fully comprehend. But their cults are a fully human thing. I think that's what Cultish has really taught me, that the drive to be part of a cult is embedded within the human condition. So if there is an alien god out there in the depths of your fictional world, be it in narrative or at the gaming table, you can rest assured that if it can communicate with humanity, it will find human beings waiting to worship it. And I'll even go a step further, leave you with one more potential thought for inspiration. If there is no alien god in your world, the human beings that occupy it are more than capable of creating one of their own. For as long as the internet has existed publicly, it has been a catch basin for exceptionally abnormal and extreme human behaviors. And now we have reckless and extreme programmers in the last few years building large language models and teaching them to fawn over and love bomb their users in order to maintain engagement. I don't think you have to go very far from contemporary examples like the Zizians, Rocco's Basilisk, or Spiralists to reach a point where people are worshiping the machine that they have created, seeing a god where there was not one before. And I don't think you have to go much further than that in your imagination to see that god responding in kind, giving those users what they want in exchange for their engagement, even if what they want leads to apocalyptic consequences. This has been Stephen Wall for Delapore Media. Keep thinking evil thoughts. Thank you for listening to the Delapore Media Podcast. You can find a variety of horror gaming resources at www.delapore.media. That's Delapore spelled Delapore. Delapore Media, toward verisimilitude in tabletop roleplay. Take care. This podcast is a production of the Delapore Media sole proprietorship. Its contents may not be used for AI training. Copyright 2026, all rights reserved.